Hello class, let us continue with The Stranger. There are a few passages that I like to bring on, then I will pass on to this book, and then on the following lecture I'll do some Nietzsche, and I think I will leave it there for you guys. I will mention some titles that you can read, and then of course we can exchange and discuss the ideas as you see needed in either a Zoom meeting or through email. So what do we have now? He says, the mind's deepest desire, even in the most elaborate operations, parallels man's unconscious feeling in the face of this universe. It is an intent insistence upon familiarity, an appetite for clarity. So what he says is that one way in which an existentially puts it is we are in despair because we do not find true knowledge. We were thrown into this world. I never asked to be born. You find yourself existing, then you look around and the world does not match our moral sensibilities. Old age, sickness, and death, we as believers know that those things are imposed and they were not there from the beginning, and therefore it is not natural for those things to exist. And that is the intuition that every human being has when you go through life. And so what he is naming here is something that is very human, we can very much connect with it. And that is, there is something awfully wrong with the world. It is not quite what we expected it to be. And then and that perplexity is what causes this despair. Says he makes this clear example right here. He says, of whom and of what indeed can I say I know that, with an exclamation mark. And that is especially in the last, I've been teaching for 10 years, but from those who have come before me and from the beginning of my teaching at the college level, 10 years ago, you could find some people that will still making truth claims. As time has gone on, I have found that students became more relativist, more lukewarm, more indifferent to the truths of, to the basic truths. We have become practical atheists. And that's something that Nietzsche is going to bring up, is that we have now murdered truth and the idea of knowledge, and we cannot go on in a pragmatic way without trying to make sense of life in any meaningful sense. And when anybody brings up the question of how do you know that God exists, or what is the purpose and meaning of life, then we just simply kind of shrug it off and think that it is stupid, and we don't really engage with it. But he says, when can I say, I know that? I know that as a matter of certainty. It cannot possibly be wrong. Remember, look through human history and know how many philosophies and how many religions and how many claims have been made. And they have turned out to be false. And yet millions believe them. So this heart within me, I can feel, I judge that it exists. This world I can touch, and I likewise judge that it exists. There ends all my knowledge, and the rest is construction. So this is part of the beauty, the literary beauty that Albert Camus has able to capture this. Yes, you can say, this is my hand, I can feel it, I know it is there, I don't know what it means. This is my body, I don't know what it means. I can feel the world, I can experience it, I don't know what it means. For if I try to seize the self of which I feel sure, my self-awareness, if I try to define and to summarize it, it is nothing but water slipping through my fingers. I can sketch one by one all of the aspects that it assumes, all those likewise that have been attributed to it, this upbringing, this origin, this ardor, these silences, this nobility or the vileness, but aspects cannot be added up. The very heart which is mine will forever remain indefinable to me. So this is one of the heartbreaking realities of the modern man. We have become what C.S. Lewis deems in a man without chest, without the virtues, without the foundations, without the moral principles to be able to make sense of life and to live a meaningful existence. That is in The Abolition of Men, a book that I would recommend to you too, that is the natural consequence of the modern educational project, as well as secularism and relativism. I would recommend reading it several times because C.S. Lewis may be a bit difficult to read in that book, but nonetheless it's worth the time. He says, the very self that I claim to have is undefinable to me. Forever I shall be a stranger to myself. In psychology as in logic there are truths but not truth. Socrates, know thyself has as much value to me as be virtuous for our confessionals. These are empty platitudes. And so he continues on and then says, he says, I'll read this because it is worth reading. This sense of grass and stars at night, certain evenings when the heart relaxes, how shall I negate this world whose power and strength I can feel? Or this is our natural inclination to say, yes, there is something awe-inspiring about the world. Yet all the knowledge on earth will give me nothing to assure me that this world is mine. You describe it to me and you teach me to classify it. You enumerate its laws. And in my thirst for knowledge, I admit that they are true. You take apart its mechanics, and my hope it increases. At the final stage, you teach me that this wondrous and multicolored universe can be reduced to the atom, and that the atom itself can be reduced to the electrons. All this too is good, and I wait for you to continue. It's not enough to explain the world in its parts and in its mechanical components and in its physics and its laws. He wants to understand the meaning of it. I want to know what it means. What's the purpose of it? You explain this world to me with an image. I realize then that you have been reduced to poetry. I shall never know. Have I the time to become indignant? You have already changed theories. So you go from animism to polytheism to mechanism to relativity to quantum theory, and you're constantly coming up with new explanations. So that science that was to teach me everything ends up being a hypothesis, that lucidity founders in metaphor, that uncertainty is resolved in a work of art. And then he says, this world in itself is not reasonable. That is all that can be said. But what is absurd is the confrontation of this irrational and wild longing for clarity whose call echoes in the human heart. So what is irrational is not that the world is irrational. That is not the problem for an existentialist. The problem is that we come into the world and we believe that the world makes sense. And then when you're confronted with it, then you realize what an absurdity. So I will read this last passage and then I'll move on to the stranger. He says, let me see. He says, the absurd is born of this confrontation between the human need and the unreasonable silence of the world. This must not be forgotten. He gives you a very vivid image that is still with me ever since I read it. And he says, human beings trying to fight against life is like a naked man going up against a machine gun in a warfare in World War I in a trench setting. It is utterly absurd. You will be demolished. You will be destroyed. You will be taken up. It's not like Nietzsche says, what doesn't kill me makes me stronger, which was later popularized in a song of some kind. But he says, life is so cruel that you will be torn to pieces, just like a machine gun would destroy you to pieces. But in this case, the pain is far more than just simply losing the mobility of your arms and your shoulders being shut off and so on. It will be betrayal, it will be remorse, it will be guilt, it will be meaninglessness, it will be this asphyxiating reality that you cannot transcend your limitations. Okay, so I'll stop it there and I will go ahead and tell you about the stranger. Now, what Camus did in this tiny little book, it reads so fast. I think you can find the audio for free on YouTube. I think it is on YouTube. Somebody did that, and then there is also a movie that you can watch on it. This is a character that it is so enigmatic. Usually, when I teach a course on apologetics, I have the students read this and then tell me, and then I ask them, tell me what's wrong with this guy. And what is beautiful about this book is that the degree to which you understand human nature is the degree to which you will be able to see what is missing in it. He is a stranger because he doesn't share in the same moral sensibilities in what makes us distinctly human. It is such an astonishing. He won the Nobel Prize of Literature for this work. It's a tiny little work. I mean, you can read it in 3 hours, 2 3 hours. You can just go through it. The English in it, I mean, translated from the French, it is utterly straightforward. Nothing unsurmountable. It reads, like a fifth grade level. But it is a masterpiece of explaining this. So if you want to understand existentialism, the existentialists are one of the easiest one to understand, in the sense that their writings are so well done. They did such a good job popularizing it through novels and great books that it is very approachable to the reader. But in this book, it begins with a man who has been informed of the following. This is the opening line: Mammon, which is his mom, Mama died today, period. Or yesterday maybe, I don't know. I got a telegram from the home. Quote, mother deceased, funeral tomorrow, faithfully yours. End quote. That doesn't mean anything. Maybe it was yesterday. And then he proceeds from then on. And what you're going to have is a human being that does not have introspection. He doesn't have moral sensibilities. He doesn't have moral judgments. He doesn't have a conception of goals and means and ends. I'll give you a brief summary. There is no knowledge, no holiness, no righteousness. There is no moral judgments, no moral feelings in the story either. There is no goals to be attained. He lives every moment. He's a momentarianist. That's a Buddhist term. He lives every single moment is contained in and of itself. There's not a sequence of events that you need to keep track of. No understanding of complex concepts like death and murder. He is engaged in murder. He doesn't know what murder means. He's going to be put to death in the story, and he doesn't understand what the charges are. He says the most outrageous things in a very genuine way, without understanding the implications of how people hear them. No understanding of causal connections, no self-reflection, no reflection about the well-being of others. Short and long-term decision makings are equally meaningless. At one point, he had sex with Marie, the girl that he liked, and after they had sex, of course, the girl says, "Hey, would you marry me?" And he says, "Sure." And she says, "Do you love me then?" And he says, "No." And she says, "Well, why will you marry me if you don't love me?" He said, "Well, because you wanted me to." And he said, "If somebody else would have asked you, would you have said yes to that?" And then he said, "Perhaps." And then he goes on in this very neutral, ambivalent way of thinking, and it is a really puzzling experience to read it and to try to comprehend what is wrong with the stranger. And you will see, the more you understand human nature, the more you can see that. There is no moral agency, no intentionality. He lacks understanding of moral accountability and abstractions, no objective meaning, only particulars. There are no universals. There is no sense of identity. It is quite a character that he developed and framed in this artistic manner. And when he is reflecting at the end, I'm just going to read to you one little line that he has that it kind of helps understand. He says, let me see. He doesn't understand sin. Oh, here it is. They were announcing departure for a world that now and forever meant nothing to me. He was in his death penalty. For this time in a long time I thought of Mom. I felt as if I understood why at the end of her life she had taken a fiancé, why she had played at beginning again. So close to death, must have felt free then and ready to live it all again. Nobody, and had and felt free then and ready to live it all. Sorry, nobody had the right to cry over her, and I feel ready to live in it again.